Alright guys, Red here. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Crusader Industries Hercules Starlifter series. We're going to be comparing all the variants and seeing some of their strengths and weaknesses and doing a little tour/review along the way. The Hercules uses a patented military grade space frame that allows it to massively expand its cargo capacity. The C2 variant has taken the private sector by storm and became the industry standard for racing teams, ship dealers, construction orgs, mining corps, and even large-scale entertainment outfits. The M2 is the UEE's premier tactical starlifter. The ship's potent combination of capacity, manoeuvrability, and durability make it the obvious choice in large-scale transport. The robust weapons package assures your cargo and crew get to where they're going in one piece. And lastly, the A2 gunship has been used to devastating effect in airborne assaults, search and rescue operations, and landing initiatives. With more than double the firepower of the M2 and a custom bomb bay capable of delivering a staggering payload, the A2 caters to anyone hauling massive amounts of cargo through potentially unfriendly skies. With all that out the way, let's get down to the hangar and review some ships. This is the Hercules A2, and we will treat this as the default version. So unless I point out something in particular, you're safe to assume it's the same in all three versions. In terms of similarities, they all have the exact same airframe, with the majority of the weight in the back, leading up to this extended neck and cockpit. It makes for quite the distinctive silhouette, and I'm betting there's many a citizen out there filled their spacesuits when they've seen this shadow pass overhead. Its shape is almost familiar as well, and has a slight hint towards modern jetliners and the way the cockpit is shaped. Coming underneath, we can find access for the front ramp. This is definitely the coolest ramp in the game, as these two wings open up and then retract, and the main ramp extends, revealing an absolutely massive entrance into the main cargo area. I have to take a moment right now to say that getting dropped off to a combat zone out of here, alongside ground vehicles and sometimes even small ships, is a genuinely awesome experience. All variants come with two size 5 pilot controlled hardpoints, which are situated on top just behind the cockpit. The A2 and the M2, however, both have this extra nose turret on the front, which houses two size 5 hardpoints. In fact, one of the primary differences between all three versions is the number of remote turrets available. Obviously, everything for the ramp just goes in reverse here, but the way it closed up and slots back in to become perfectly flush does give me a genuine sense of satisfaction. Coming around the side, we have these massive wing-like reverse thrusters with a giant hole going through the wing. Again, just breathtaking design and overindulgence and coolness. Then underneath we have a remote size 5 hardpoint on each wing. Coming back to the rear, we have another 3 remote turrets, a size 6 with 2 size 5 hardpoints on both the left and right underside, and then a central turret as well that is size 5 with 2 size 4 hardpoints. And yeah, the guns are getting a bit insane at this point, and we're still not even finished. These folded wingtips eventually fold up when the ship is powered on, and can be put back down to enable VTOL. I really love that, and it gives you that little extra bit of space to manoeuvre in when trying to land in hangars and stuff. Some very nice and well designed, sturdy looking rear landing gear here, with just a single one near the front middle. Coming around the back, we have the main thruster section of the ship, and these spoiler winglet aileron things. Not sure if they're intended to eventually be a moving flight surface or not, but those rear thrusters are absolute monsters. Compared to something like the Caterpillar flying in atmosphere, there is a distinct thrust advantage with the Hercules. Its power and speed are enormous when compared to other large ships around its weight class. We have another very sturdy and nicely designed rear hatch and ramp as well, meaning the distribution of people and vehicles can be performed both safely and efficiently, as they can exit separately on either end of the ship. Coming up the ramp, however, we run into what is definitely a primary selling point for the A2. These are the two launch bays for the 4 size 10 Colossus bombs. As you can probably tell, these bad boys are for those special occasions when you absolutely positively have to kill every motherfucker in the room. There's an access panel here for raising the ramp, and it will also allow you to change the lighting. Nothing else in here does anything really, but obviously we're looking at one of the largest cargo bays in the game, as of 3.19 at least. The A2 can hold 216 SCU of cargo, which is the quite significant penalty for this version, as the M2 can hold 522 and the C2 can hold 696. The rear ramp is also pretty restricted access wise compared to the other two versions because of the bomb bays near the door. Over here there's ways to adjust the lighting again in here, and the front ramp opening from the inside somehow manages to be even more impressive from the inside. Coming into the middle there is a main crew elevator and an access ladder that reaches to the upper deck. The lift itself is capable of servicing both the lower and upper decks and also goes out to the ground level. Once we get to the upper deck, we have some more panel controls for messing with the lighting. Under this raised middle section, we have some access panels that open up some cool storage spaces with nice animations. It's these little things that I appreciate most in Star Citizen, and it all looks as though it's been fitted around some central shaft of some kind that's possibly integral for the engine to function. The way this is all laid out definitely helps to keep the design tidy, but also realistically grounded and interesting. There's quite a few of these that are all pretty much the same, and they are the same on both sides of the ship. Coming closer to the back, we come across some of the component housing. These things are absolutely massive and can't be removed by the player with a tractor multi-tool, the reason being that you'd need to cut a hole in the hull to remove them and then fit a new one. Hence why they can only be changed at shipyards, I guess. The component numbers and sizes are all the same for all versions, although you may get more or less expensive ones as default with your purchases. I've always imagined this here as somehow part of the main quantum drive perhaps, and it's a nice futuristic touch. It'd be really cool if in the future we get to fiddle around with these things and tune them up or fix them, maybe even sabotage other people's too. Making our way back, we come across the turret access room, and if we head through here first, we come to the armory. This appears to be very well designed and looks like it can hold enough for a small army. It's also very spacious as well, so you're not all trampling over one another. A nice set of gun racks and armour closets with cool little doors, making combat deployment pretty much what you've always wanted it to be. As we come back into the turret access room, we have 4 chairs. These are all for remote access to the guns around the ship. You cannot just swap between the guns virtually, which is a bit of a pointless pain in my opinion, but you have to physically exit each chair and go to the corresponding chair for each turret. The front two on the left and right control the single size 5 hardpoints on either side of the ship, whereas the rear left and right chairs correspond to the left and right size 6 twin turrets on the underside. Why CIG haven't made these turrets switchable is beyond me, to be honest. I guess they think it will force multi-crew gameplay this way, but it's just not believable that all these turrets couldn't be controlled from a single chair. Anyway, moving on, if we come across this middle section here, we come to another engineering section, which is essentially just a mirror image of the other side. This looks like the cooling system in here, and this must be the power plant. Back around to this door we find the habitation areas, and here we have a cosy little kitchen. Nothing is really functional, unfortunately. Could be doing with a coffee machine at least. Sometimes your money doesn't go as far as you'd think in Stanton, but it's all outfitted nicely. Nice aesthetic, nothing too over the top. Once again, it's all functional yet tidy and ordered. Back in the sleeping quarters we have 4 of these storage cupboards, 2 here and 2 on the far side of the room, that again come with their own cool little opening and closing animation. A pair of some pretty nifty little toilets, although they seem to be lacking any shower functionality, and 8 beds. so definitely enough to hold a decent complement of crew for some longer stretches in the field. And that about covers this main section of the ship. Time to start moving up the slender neck section towards the cockpit. And here we have some more component storage. By the way, all three variants have 2 size 3 shields, 2 size 3 power plants, and 2 size 3 coolers, and a size 3 quantum drive. If you wanted to A-rate that, it would cost you over $1 million space bucks. This must be the shields in here, and probably the quantum drive, I'm guessing. Coming forward again, we have the escape pod section. There's 8 escape pods in here, which matches the bed number nicely. And obviously, these aren't implemented currently in the game, but they do have working doors though, so sometimes you just have to take what you can get. Then finally, we've made it to the bridge of the ship. And now we can definitely see a striking resemblance to modern aircraft. There's a panel on either side here which looks to be for some future use of some kind, perhaps radar access. We have a gunner chair which controls the main nose turret, which is a size 5 with dual size 4 hardpoints. Again, this turret isn't switchable. Over here we have the co-pilot's chair, where we have access to a couple of MFDs and some switches, and the rear top turret. Fortunately, this turret is switchable and you could switch to the lower centre aft turret. Both of these turrets are size 5 with 2 size 4 hardpoints, bringing the total firepower to 8 size 4 hardpoints, 6 size 5 hardpoints, and 2 size 10 missile racks that carry the 4 Colossus bombs. That's just a preposterous amount of firepower, and you had better seriously dread the day you cross a fully crewed A2. Over on the pilot's chair we can see how restricted this canopy is. This is pretty bad for visibility, to be honest, especially for a bomber, but the cockpit itself is absolutely gorgeous. Jumping outside we can get a better view of the ship. Such a cool design. Long, smooth lines all flowing back to that back end that definitely looks like it can handle lifting any mass we would care to throw at it. Coming back inside, we can start her up.
Crusader Industries, a journey worth taking. Systems on.
Sounds of it starting are really deep and thunderous, and it matches well. It also helps to solidify that feeling of raw power under refined control, and you could tell that there's some thought went into the mentality of Crusader Industries when they were designing this ship. They need to get cargo in and out of Crusader's gravity well, so they've just completely over-engineered this thing, and it really comes off as highly capable and well built. Although the visibility is extremely poor, this is still one of my favourite cockpits in the game. I like the similarities between commercial airliners. I love the buttons along the roof and in the centre to my right, and the 4 MFDs are all quite chunky looking as well, matching all the switches and dials. It's got a nice sort of Nostromo feel to it. Everything is tactile and overbuilt slightly. The position and number of the MFDs isn't great, however, but as the pilot of such a large ship, you're really only going to be mostly just flying it anyway. Other tasks will likely be handed over to a co-pilot and crew. Plus, I refer you to the steering wheel. Totally makes up for everything. Behind the cockpit we have the pilot-controlled weapons. These are a pair of size 5 hardpoints, so can be gimbaled with size 4 weapons. Toggling the power to weapons is what triggers the weapons to expose, meaning you could choose to have a perfectly sleek look if you aren't in combat. A few of the other weapons extend slightly when the weapons are activated as well. The 2 centre rear turrets also separate out very slightly from the ship. The landing gear animations are, as is usual with CIG, absolutely believable and on point. More than that even. The mechanical operations of the moving sections in this game really put other games I've seen to shame, if I'm being perfectly honest. The VTOL animation is pretty sick as well here. One more thing that I should show here is the animation for the bomb bay. Everything's all physicalised and as real as you'd expect from CIG. The next bomb cycling into place is just exquisite. In terms of what you could use this ship for, I think it would be faster to list the things that you can't use this ship for. It's an absolute angel of death. Obviously, it can't mine and it can't salvage, but it would be excellent support for those carrying loot and guns, extra RMC, or even prospector bags, whilst giving good cover from its many turrets. I think solo PvE combat is a bit problematic, but given the shield strength, if you really wanted to, you could probably get there in the end. PvP would obviously be pretty pointless unless your target is also in a bigger ship. Add some crew to your roster however, and this thing is an absolute monster, and can do any type of combat you can throw at it. Aside from covering most mission types in the game, its primary role is clearly logistical in nature. So if you need to drop off any serious hardware, tanks, ballistas, centurions, this is pretty much the only ship in the game that can do that very comfortably. Not to mention you can get a lot of the smaller ships in here as well, like the Merlins and the Furies, etc. Given its versatility, it's also a great pirate ship too, or you can pack it with racers, both flying and ground, for you and your friends, all of which doesn't really mention its big ace in the hole. Whatever you're doing, you know that if you're not sure of the situation, you can always just nuke the place from orbit, just to be sure. If you're doing deliveries or extractions from outposts, nuke it from orbit. If you're doing jumptown, nuke it from orbit. If you're doing Ghost Hollow, nuke it from orbit. I mean, don't get me wrong, if your primary focus is on profit, that's probably a really bad idea, because those bombs cost a fortune. But it would be completely wrong of me to not mention just how fun it is, nuking things from orbit. Now, obviously, I don't actually mean orbit. Personally, I find it's better to be close enough and going slow enough so that you can see the whites of their eyes when the bomb goes off. But maybe I'm just like that, I don't know. Next up, we're going to do the C2. Obviously, this will be a lot quicker as we've covered most things already, but there are a few significant changes. As we've already said, the airframe is the same, and obviously the default paint has changed. Apart from that, a lot of the turrets are missing. The C2 has the least amount of weapons, as its primary focus is transport and cargo, so it retains the two size 5 hardpoints behind the pilot up top, but the nose turret is now gone. Similarly, there are no wing mounted single turrets or left and right underside double turrets. All that remains is the middle, rear, upper and lower size 5 turrets with two size 4s on each. When we get inside however, we see that without the bomb bays the cargo has leapt up an enormous amount to almost 700 SCU. As it stands, before the Hull C comes in, that's the biggest cargo hauler in the game, and even then the Hull C won't be able to land whilst laden, so this will remain the king for quite some time yet it seems. The only real other difference, to be honest, is up on the top deck where the turret control room and armoury used to be. We now have a recreational pod, which is outfitted with a nice table, some food preparation areas, a TV and stuff, some books here and there. Also along the neck of the ship, instead of just rows of escape pods, there is now only 2 escape pods. But we now have some space here for a couple of armour sets and some gun racks, which is actually pretty convenient. Everything else is exactly the same, apart from there's no gunner seat in the cockpit, and just like before, the co-pilot can switch between the 2 rear turrets, which is actually pretty annoying when you think about it, because it means you can't have them both active at the same time. What could you use this ship for? Well, pretty much everything you use the A2 for, but with less focus on combat and defence. If you really wanted to, like I said before, you can do solo PvE bounties with it, due to the shield strength. I'd imagine you can only take that so far though, then the manoeuvrability would start showing cracks against the more advanced ships. Remember, there's no missiles aboard either, so a quick in and out on the primary target wouldn't be as quick as you'd like. And you're likely to have 2 size 5 gimbaled to size 4, so in my head that's only 8 total, but it's definitely possible. Obviously there's a bit more space in this version, so you can really stuff a lot of stuff in here too. You can even get a few vehicles in here and still have room to shift a sizable amount of cargo, and that's where its real draw really lies. If you're serious about doing the cargo game, then this is no doubt where you should probably end up in the long run. And that's a bit of a shame because I love the Caterpillar as well, but apart from the occasional trip for posterity reasons, the chances are, if you're trying to make serious bank, then you're going to go for the C2 every time. Not just for cargo capacity reasons, but for speed reasons. The Cat is slow as hell trying to get out of Atmo and just adds too much time to your round trip. So obviously no salvage, no mining, but everything else should be good with a C2, just with a fair bit less firepower, if it all goes sideways. And no bomb fun obviously. But it is the cheapest and holds the most stuff, so if you're a solo industrial gaming guy, this is probably the version for you. Next up is the M2. Now really there isn't a massive difference between the versions, so there's only a couple of things we need to cover here. First off, we've got the nose turret back that was size 5 with 2 size 4 hardpoints. We've kept the 2 centre rear top and bottom turrets, so that means those 2 turrets are on all versions essentially. Basically this is like a mix between the A2 and the C2. It's a bit less military than the A2 and a bit less cargo than the C2. If we come inside the main cargo area, you'll see that it's the exact same size as the C2. However, it only holds 522 SCU against the C2's 696. Why? I honestly don't know. It doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. Assuming the same engine sizes etc, there is absolutely no reason why this couldn't haul the same as the C2. And it does come over as a bit lazy to be honest, on CIG's part. Even a missile payload would have made this version seem less sort of shoehorned in there. You can still stack the same amount of cargo in here if you do it manually I guess, it's just there's no cargo grid to support it. Anyway, there's one more difference I should point out. If you come upstairs to where the recreation / turret room should be, we now have a few rows of dropship seats, which is pretty cool, and we have an armoury back through here again. So that's definitely a bonus, but in my opinion the cargo reduction is kind of forced and unnecessary. And given you pay more, you should just get extra, not lose something to gain something else. But what can you do? Also, that means in the cockpit, the gunner chair has returned and will now operate the forward nose turret. What would you use this version for? It's obviously slightly more capable combat wise in a multi-crew scenario. Drop seats do help keep people safe while travelling, so that's an option. But I mean, not by much. You could always just lie on the ground or sit on a bed if you happen to have one of the other versions. But it is cool though. I mean, to me, the most obvious advantage for this version would be slightly more protected cargo runs. But you've lost some cargo and need another person to operate the guns, who you'll have to pay. So, anyway, apart from that, it can do everything. These ships are fantastically multi-role and any one of them is an absolute delight to have around. This version just annoys me for some reason, but if I had one in my hangar, I'd never be out of the thing. So, it's hard to stay too negative really. Objectively, it's a slightly better C2, because it's got an armoury and more guns. But that drop in cargo is substantial enough to really get my back up for some reason. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so manoeuvrability is a bit of a troublesome one to gauge correctly for this ship. It's not built to be manoeuvrable really. It's not meant for evasion. If something shoots at you, they would have a really hard time trying to miss. Compared to its own other versions, There is zero difference across the board. Top speed, combat speed, pitch, roll and yaw are all identical, which again is a bit of another missed opportunity. At least some advantage could have been given out here. When compared with ships around about its own weight class, it doesn't actually do as well as I had expected. For example, even though the Carrack is 1 million kilograms heavier, you can see that its combat speed and its max speed are actually quite a bit faster. And its pitch, yaw and roll are almost the same. Compared to its main competition, the Caterpillar, it does have a decent advantage however, in every single category. Even still, I expected this to be a lot more apparent, so I done some digging around and I found this. In a straight line, the acceleration of the Starlifter up to top speed far outstrips the rest of these candidates. In fact, the acceleration is comparable and even faster than something a lot smaller, such as the Andromeda, 400i, Retaliator, and even the Freelancer series. And this is one of the highlights for me. If you have a C2 and you're just running cargo, this helps a lot, as you can imagine. Helps you escape if you get into bother, helps cut down your round trip times, especially if you're dipping atmosphere along the way, and it helps you feel like the investment you made in this ship is an absolute powerhouse that was worth every penny. Just don't run any canyons or low fly with it though, it never ends well. So for combat, it's actually a lot better than you'd think. In the background is me going against a very high risk target. I've slipped in, drew away the target to a higher orbit, and then just used those 2 size 3 shields against him. This isn't even using the gimbals for the size 4 hardpoints. Going against extreme risk targets, I mean, I'll leave that one for you to find out. I believe it can be done. The shields are plentiful, so as long as you keep moving and back off to recharge, it should be doable. It might just take a fair amount of time. In PvP, you're going to come a cropper. If you know PvP is unavoidable, you could stash a PvP ship in the cargo bay and probably have enough time to deploy it. An arrow would fit. If you have a crew, then you can definitely make it difficult for the attackers for sure. But at the end of the day, it's a cargo / transport ship. It's the sort of ship that should be protected by light fighters, not going nose to nose with them. Your results may vary however. In summary then, the honest truth is throughout the entirety of 3.19 I haven't been out the C2. I started out doing some decent paying cargo runs for Beryl mainly, then I was trying the salvage missions where you pay for the rights to the salvage, and every now and again you find a crazy expensive payload aboard a wreck, and I was just filling up the hold and making serious money. It's a very reliable ship. Then I was doing some mining with the Rock, and again I took the C2, and it meant that I could load a Fury in there in case I got into trouble, and the C8R to heal any damage I took. So I had mining capability, fighting capability and medical capacity as well, all inside this one larger ship. And that extended as well. I started doing bunkers and swapped the Rock out for a mule. I loaded it up with a P52 and a Razor and went racing to see which one gave me better times, and then I was in it a lot more to gather footage for this vid. It's pretty safe to say I've become very well acquainted with the C2, and in terms of getting stuff done, it really hasn't got much in terms of competition. Its only downside is that solo it lacks the firepower and manoeuvrability that would be good to protect itself. If you're solo and you're not transporting a tank, say, and you know there will be trouble, then maybe a Constellation would be a better match. But it's hard to compete with the Hercules in terms of raw capacity. And if you have the manpower, you could literally take over and dominate an entire area of the system with just a single ship. A2 flies over, nukes the place, then lands, where a Centurion rolls out, followed by 2 Furies, say, and a Cyclone, as well as 12 armed personnel. It means that an almost ridiculous amount of logistical assets can be placed around an area of operations in a very short amount of time. It handles really nicely for its weight, and there's a fair bit of inertia in there, even for the small movements. Its sounds and animations are beautifully done, and because it's such a newer ship, it's got a nice level of polish all round. If I had to choose one model that was the most all round, I'd probably take the C2. The other two models are definitely cooler, but you can stash items in a ship inventory instead of in an armory, and the use case for dropping nukes is pretty limited. This is obviously heavily dependent on what you're doing, however. If you're likely to have a crew and coming into scrapes, then it might be better to consider the other versions. If you've got a friend and want your cargo to be a bit more protected, then possibly go for the M2. If you're going to be getting into combat with a crew or would just like to clear the area around bunkers before going in them, the A2 is sublime. But for day-to-day money grinding and transport of vehicles, the C2 should have you covered 90% of the time. Although saying that, price to performance is a bit weird for this one, as to be honest, there isn't as much a jump in price as you'd expect. It's 4.9 million for the C2 as the base version, and that's obviously pretty expensive as a starting point, but the M2 is only 5.2 million and the A2 is only 5.5 million. I know we've just thrown $500,000 around there like it was nothing, but it does really leave it open for the user to decide. I'd struggle to say the C2 is the best here, even though the extra storage is usually what I'd appreciate the most. Another 200 to 300 for the dropship armory and extra gun doesn't seem too bad, even though you've lost some cargo. And to have the all bristling array of guns on the A2 as well as the nuke capability for only another 200 to 300k on top of that also seems pretty reasonable. Compared to the Caterpillar again, it seems pretty good. Cat is 4.6 million, so that's only 300k for the C2 upgrade. The Carrack would be the only decent comparison, and that's 26 million. You can maybe compare the Starfarer, which is 6.6. So the Hercules is kind of just sitting there right where it should be, if I'm being honest. Scored out of 10, all three would get a 9 from me. I'd have preferred the M2 to have the same cargo as the C2 and just with extra guns for more money, so let's make that an 8, but that armory and drop seats bring it back up a touch, so 8.5 say. For a loadout, you're going to want the military grade TS2 quantum drive, probably go with the FR86 shields as well. For everything else, it can be left as standard to save some money. If you're going up against smaller targets, maybe swap out some of the guns to laser repeaters instead of cannons. Also, take care to check how things currently stand, as once engineering comes into the game, a lot of the values for components are likely to shift a lot. So check Hercule.games for the latest infos there. And that's it. That's all three variants of the Hercules, reviewed and compared to the best of my humble ability. Thanks for watching. Remember, like and subscribe. Remember, there's a Patreon. 07 guys.